two, 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 and a mic. Two, and a mic. Two, 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 and a mic. Two, 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 and a mic. Karin, thank you very much for coming back. I guess a lot of people who listened to the first 9 episodes were sort of sitting there gently tapping their desks thinking, where is she? But yeah, you are better. You had a bout of being unwell, but luckily you are much better now. So welcome back. It's always good to have an opportunity to talk with you. Today we're going to do something different though, aren't we? We're going to move to talking about one of your real passions, which is literature, but more specifically 19th century literature, if I'm not mistaken. And you have picked a novel by Elisabeth Gaskell, North and South, which I have to admit I haven't read. However, I have done some background research into some of the themes that are discussed here, so I will be able to engage at least a little bit. But yeah, so what can I say? It's great to have you back, and yeah, would you like to talk about any sort of general thoughts that you may have had in the intervening period?
It's great to be back, and it's great to be able to breathe again. Well, which was my trouble. I had some heart problem. But I can breathe again. My voice is cracking a little bit. I don't mind. You don't mind. So in general, I picked North and South as an example of 19th century women's literature by women who were engaged in writing novels. In many cases, they had to use men's names first, like Charlotte Bronte, who I'll be talking about a little bit too. Mrs. Gaskell was the wife of a minister in Manchester, and her novels are fascinating because they cover a lot of subjects and in depth. To me, they are novels in terms of letting you look into the window of houses. They are, in terms of language, they are poetic. So you could also say they have some lyrical aspects. And they have dramatic aspects, which is a look into the streets where things happening, where social life is rougher than inside the individual or the houses. But they all are intertwined, and this parallel development in terms of human being, society, and economy is what fascinated me in Gaskell. It already had before that fascinated me in Shirley. Shirley is a novel by Charlotte Bronte, and I discovered Mrs. Gaskell through the Brontes. There's a biography of Charlotte Bronte by Mrs. Gaskell. So this is how I first met her, and then I started reading everything she wrote, and was fascinated by everything, with the exception that North and South fascinated me more because it is a novel about England. It's a novel about English life and social life and society and social struggle in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But North and South is a division which you almost have in every country. You have one part industrialized, the other part rural, and the strife between those two elements. You have it in Brazil. You have it in a way in many other in America as well. So it brought a lot of insight into my own country and into the history of my country, and it touched on a period in German literature I had worked in very closely, which is the beginning of the 19th century and later the mid of the 19th century, with the social strife around 1848. 1848 was the first attempt at democracy in Germany, and it failed. Mrs. Gaskell wrote North and South around 1948, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, although she placed it into the early part of the 19th century.
1848, you mean?
18, yeah, I'm sorry,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
That's, It was written in 1854-55 and was hugely successful. And as an aside, I love the BBC version of it with lots of good actors, and it really gives the novel its due. At the same time, reading is a different kind of experience, and it's fuller. It gives you more detail. It gets you more into all kinds of aspects of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, listening to your description of it, having also read a sort of synopsis of the storyline, yeah, I am inclined to add it to my reading list. I currently have a responsibility of reading Simone de Beauvoir, and so I'm going to have to put Mrs. Gaskell sort of behind her, but I will come to her because, as you say, there is this very interesting political or economic and social divide between North and South, which is reflected in other countries' reality. So you mentioned obviously the UK, the USA, you also referred to Germany, but Germany is also interesting because it's not just North and South, but it's also East and West because of what happened after the Second World War. In Italy, you've got North against South as well, and in France as well, there is this sort of dislike, at least of the Parisian structure from Marseille, which is also quite unique to the culture. So, there are lots of these internal, not quite struggles always, but sometimes even literally struggles between various parts of countries. So is this like just, why do you think that is? Is it, why do humans within...
It usually has very, very realistic reasons. It's a division in terms of soil, in terms of climate, in terms of productivity, in terms of immigration, in terms of what is available. The prevalence of London in England is one because of the early immigration or the early influence of the Romans and the French elements that concentrated in the south. The elements of the Vikings and the Danes in the north did not have that much cultural effect as the others had. But industrialization happened in the north. It didn't happen in the south of England. So the north, and I would call Manchester north, and that this is where the cotton mills originated. And I remember my grandfather telling me that he was in textiles, that he made a lot of trips to Manchester. So whenever I discovered that Mrs. Gaskell had written about Manchester and a cotton mill, of course I got more excited, because it also brought back some memories of my grandfather. At the same time, I was getting into a feeling for English society during the 18th century, of which I did not have any clue before that. It hit on the themes of industry versus country in terms of the division that started in the Church of England, the dissidents or the nonconformists developments with Presbyterians, Methodists, and so on and so forth, which is part of the novel as well. So it also shows the different strata of society, the high society who don't have to worry about money. They have money from generations, and their children either marry rich. The girls didn't have professions; they had to marry to remain or become rich. They didn't have a status except for the status of their family. Then there is the curates or the ministers. They're a class by themselves, but they can penetrate into the aristocracy and they have input into the lower social classes. So there are kind of a dynamic strata which open up a lot of possibilities for particularly the girls. The working class is in dire straits during that time. It was not just in England, it was here as well. But it is part of a novel which deals with all the strata. It's not like Dickens, where you get drawn into the dire straits, but you see all different sides and how they interact. And what fascinated me with North and South was that there are two people who develop. Actually, there are very few other people who develop. Actually, there's a third one. The owner of the cotton mill in Manchester, which is Milton in the book, is struggling with...
This is John Thornton, yeah?
It's John Thornton. He has to struggle against the Luddites, the people who want to, who are against the way they deal with their wealth and their factories, and there are rebellions. In fact, he's in danger of being killed or hurt at one point, and this is the point where his love interest, the lady who comes into the picture as coming from the south, the daughter of a minister who left the church because he couldn't abide by all the rules of the established church and had to start teaching literature and philosophy. on a private basis, and whose student John Thornton becomes. She intervenes and throws herself into the way of a stone that's being thrown. And this is the first encounter a close encounter between the two, who had been struggling in terms of getting to like one another or understand one another. Between those two, there is a development. There's a strong development. And she draws into the development a worker, Higgins, whom she befriends, and she befriends his two daughters, particularly one who has consumption. So we are in reality. We are in the reality of Manchester capitalism, cotton mill, the fluff, the consumption, the negative aspects of industrialization. And this young lady dies.
That would be Bessie, I presume. Bessie Higgins.
Yes, Bessie Higgins. In the end, through a long development, Higgins and Thornton, the master and the worker, start to understand one another, because it was Margaret, the girl from the south, who is learning about the north.
Margaret Hale, I think.
Yes, Margaret Hale. She basically plants the idea into Thornton's head that Higgins is somebody he can trust, and vice versa. Once they get together and start solving problems together, trust one another, the strife and the rebellion leaves the picture of the novel. What comes in is outside forces, a blockade of material from America. There's a cordon around England. There's no import possibilities. And the cotton factories, of course, don't get cotton, cannot fulfill their commitments, and basically Thornton almost goes broke. This is also very real. This parallels again in all of the countries in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, where the textile industry goes bankrupt wherever you look. And so again, it's not just a novel that points to one particular point in time. It is universal in a way. And that struck me particularly also because it touched on experiences of my family.
Yeah, and I mean, also you mentioned some of the background to the development of the storylines with regards to the Industrial Revolution, the Luddites, and the religious, shall we say, divisions at the time. But there's also something called the Corn Laws, and one of the reasons why I think Manchester became so prominent was because of the Anti-Corn League, which was essentially also centered around Manchester sort of business people who wanted to remove the Corn Law, which basically was introduced to allow the landed gentry in rural areas to put the price that they wanted on their corn, as it were, on their harvests, which kept them rich. Whereas the Anti-Corn League wanted to reduce tariffs on imported foods.
That was the legal conflict between North and South.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that also sort of plays a role with regards to the background of some of the issues that are perhaps covered in the story as well. And because this and I want to introduce this as well because we are still today struggling in many ways with the balance between import and export. And also, if you look at what's happening in the UK at the moment as a result of Brexit and so on. The UK has a tradition of being an importing country with regards to foodstuffs.
Yes.
Yeah. So therefore, with the current pandemic and making it a little bit more difficult for those imports to arrive, this entire import model that the UK has with regards to food makes the current situation very difficult. So I also thought when you chose North and South that it's amazing how many sort of similarities, 170 years later, are still, essentially there today.
This is what fascinated me from the beginning. I had points of references historically before and during and after 1848 or whatever. It pulled things together. It made me understand lots of things better. Beyond the social and political aspects of the novel, it is also a love story. And the love story blends in. They are the actors within that scheme, and all the other people around them fall into a pattern with them, which makes it interesting because Gaskell can also portray people, let them develop, give us an insight into their feeling, into their thinking, into what they know. And this is very, very interesting for me. We understand that women do not have the power to get into a profession except being governesses or something like this. That's their only way out except marriage. But there are some women who love to live in wealth, like Margaret's cousin in London. They live in London, Harley Street, the best part of London, are rich, don't have to worry. And the cousin of Margaret is simply deals
Edith.
with
Edith,
with.
is this?
Is
this Edith?
Yes, Edith is, we would say, oberflächlich. She's on the surface. She's
superficial.
Yes, she's not thinking. She is simply enjoying life and doing what she wants.
Can you just say, because when I'm looking at my notes, I have the description of Edith, Margaret's pretty cousin, intellectually inferior to her, feeble-minded, innocent, spoiled. So do you think that, for example, Mrs. Gaskell used this sort of, as you say, superficial, rich, spoilt child and gave her this inferior character to make it easier to accept these sort of dysfunctional characteristics?
We have a parallel in the sister of John Thornton, who is also superficial, doesn't think about anything seriously, except when her husband makes money. She's very, very happy, and she would have liked her brother to get into a very questionable deal to make money, to get out of the straits. But he couldn't. He couldn't, because he would have had to risk the whole company and the livelihood of all of his workers. So he doesn't go in with the deal that his sisters or his brother-in-law is making money from later. But these are the two women, one having been born rich, one having become rich, because the Thorntons had not been rich from the beginning. He was a self-made man. So his sister was the beneficiary of that. Whereas Edith came from a long line of rich people who didn't have to worry.
And how does Mrs. Gaskell deal with this? As in, how does she present these characters? Is the self-made sort of nouveau riche character easier to like, do you think, in the way that she presents him?
He's fascinating. He fascinates the young lady from the South from the beginning, although she doesn't want to own up to it. He is strong. He is, in the beginning, he is cruel. He's cruel to his workers, but it's a cruelty that also has a reason. He goes all overboard and hits somebody in the factory who smoked there. Background is one spark can blow the whole cotton mill to pieces. So in one way, he doesn't have he's on the right side. He's right. On the other hand, he doesn't have control of his temper, and he doesn't trust anybody but himself, because he has been, or except for his mother, who is a fascinating character. She loves her son. Doesn't quite. She loves her daughter as well, but she doesn't respect her. There's no reason to respect her, because her daughter is just fluff. And she is identifying with her son. And her son has made everything with her, for her. And she stands right behind him. And therefore, when she sees that he's falling in love with the girl from the South, she starts hating her. Especially
when Margaret rejects him, I think, on the first.
Yes. Well, yeah. She didn't want him to. He proposes after she has thrown herself in the way of the stone that was going to hit him.
Okay.
And he felt that that was his duty, and of course it was also what he wanted. And he was sure that she would say yes. The mother was against it because she didn't want to lose him. But he made her abide by the fact that he was going to go over to the house of the Hales and propose, and he was rejected. And he was rejected almost like in Pride and Prejudice, you would be the last man on earth I would marry, which hurt him terribly. He withdrew, and it gave his mother yet another reason to hate Margaret. But she was forced to deal with Margaret and her family, because first Margaret's mother died, and later her father died as well. So there was some kind of communication between them, and she had promised Margaret's mother that she would always be honest to Margaret and basically see to it that she didn't make any mistakes. The novel is very involved in many, many ways. Many characters, many different things, but to me, the intertwining of the social, the political, the historical and the personal was so strong that to this day I reread and rewatch North and South at least once or twice a year, which for a long time I only did with Jane Austen, whom I still love. She is, in terms of the social aspect of her novels and the ironical aspects of her novels, historically earlier, because in that particular, in her novels, the women do not have a chance of anything other than marriage or being a governess or tutoring or something. And it's you don't get very much of the historical background of those times. You get much of the historical background in Gaskell.
I mean, it's fascinating because, as you allude to in your comments there, women really were not given their rightful positions within society. They were not necessarily educated or allowed, as we're talking about the masses here, not necessarily those in privileged positions, but even the ones in privileged positions, as you say, they were very disadvantaged on the basis of their gender. But we look at these. I mean, you talk about the Bronte sisters, Jane Austen, Mrs. Gaskell here. I mean, these are thoroughly deep, politically intriguing, socially and economically analytical pieces of work, which clearly shows that the women of the day were way beyond what society allowed them to express.
Yes.
And what is fascinating is exactly how relevant this work still is, and it really shows you that society really missed out by not allowing women to be more involved in society and society politics.
Just look at how many women writers of that period used men's names with their first publications. All of George Eliot, who is a woman, all of her books appeared under her male name. The three Bronte sisters wrote under male names. Mrs. Gaskell, in the beginning, used a male name. Later, she wrote under her own. But there were quite a number of women who could not have gotten into our consciousness as writers if they hadn't used male names. And this, to me, is also a sign of the time. Okay, you have Charles Dickens, who is very, very powerful, and he published many of the women we've been talking about in segments, like I think many of the novels by Mrs. Gaskell were published by Dickens as a series. And he promoted quite a few women writers in his publications. But to this day, everybody knows Dickens. Nobody knows Mrs. Gaskell. Nobody knows George Eliot. I remember a German writer, a prominent writer, came to the Goethe Institute in London and was giving a talk on literature. And she alluded to the books that she had read and really, really appreciated by George Eliot. And she said, he is really a very good writer. And there was an outcry because of the he.
Yeah.
She didn't know. A writer didn't know that we weren't given all the information about what happened in the 18th century, in the 19th century.
Yeah, 1800s.
18th
Yeah.
century.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. And I mean, it also, again, also highlights that, I mean, because I recently read a very troubling essay by a lady who works in I think, marketing and advertising industry, Zoe Scanlon, I believe her name is, about how sort of women are treated extremely unfairly, subjugated, abused in many ways, at least verbally and contextually in many cases as well. And, a part of what her essay was that, men who are also involved within the industry should not allow other men to get away with things, no matter of their seniority. And they should speak up. They should become more active. They should become involved. Not because women necessarily need their help, but society requires that of them. And Charles Dickens shows all those years ago that such a thing is necessary.
Yes.
Because without people like Dickens, we would not have had so many of these wonderful female authors.
Absolutely. What struck me also was that those educated women in many of the novels were either educated through tutors, like in Shirley. She is a strong character by Charlotte Bronte, shy and strong at the same time. She's a rich woman. Because she is rich, she had a tutor, and she was very smart. In North and South, there is Margaret, daughter of a minister, who was allowed to read and learn as much as she could and as much as she wanted. All the others didn't learn anything. They did not have education. Education was for the men. So again, the clerics, the strata of the clerics, was the one that could guide you up or down. They would be able to penetrate the upper classes with their women, because these women were more educated than others, and could attract men from the upper classes. So it was also about education. There was no education, or as long as there was no education for women, women didn't have a chance.
And this is something clearly which, I'm sure most people know by now, but didn't change until after the First World War and the suffragettes. So, we're still talking about 70 years, more or less, after the story is published. And that's quite a lot of time. And also it should be mentioned that, even the educated women who clearly were gifted in areas of mathematics and science, when they were not allowed to hold official positions within universities until very late into the 20th century. And lots of, I think, male professors actually, they put their names down to these theories because the women were not allowed to do so simply. So. Yes. Yeah, this kind of behavior went, some might say it even exists today, but academia is almost a law unto itself. But it really was very, very difficult for women up until moderately recently.
Moderately, even into the period after the Second World War. I remember when I grew up, when I was 10, ready to go to gymnasium, high school. First reaction, my father, who should have known, he knew better, but he should not even have said it. He said, we can't send you there because it costs money, and you have 2 brothers to come after you. At which point I went to my teacher, and he came to visit my father, and my father hadn't been that serious about my not going. But he really gave him a talk and said, you cannot do that. This girl needs to go to high school. You can't keep her down.
It was great that you had the support of your teacher in that. I mean, because that's a very brave thing to do. I mean, nowadays teachers would, try to avoid having such interactions with parents because it's just not worth it for them for the hassle.
Well, this was wait a minute, 46 or 48. So directly after the war, and we had a elementary school which only had 2 classes. First through 4th grade, 5th through 8th grade. And this teacher had allowed me to do mathematics with the 6th grade when I was 7 or 8. He had a reason for it. His own daughter was just 1 day younger than I was, and she was supposed to go to high school as well, to gymnasium as well. So I got the benefit of his push because he was pushing his own daughter, but I had the privilege of having German. Not in the 3rd grade or 4th grade, but in the 7th grade. I could simply walk from one room into the next. We had a 2-room elementary school. And I would have a different kind of instruction than the rest of my class, which was a blessing because my mother had taught me when we were evacuated in Thuringia, and I could read and write when I was 5. So I would have been bored stiff if he hadn't allowed that. But I was the lucky one that he did. And in the end, my father wasn't serious because he had been. He had studied. He was a diploma engineer. He had been outside of Germany for 4 years in Japan. Of course, he wanted his daughter to have a good education, but because of that one sentence, I could empathize with the women of the 19th century better than otherwise. Because there had been a question. They had no answers. I got the right answer, but they had only questions. They were not allowed to.
And yet they found a way, though. I mean, which also exhibits or speaks volumes for their character.
Exactly. There were strong women, and this is what pulled me into literature by women in England, because England has a tradition of letting women be strong. You have English women who went through the colonies looking for different kinds of flowers, painting them. If you go to London in Kew Gardens, there's a pavilion with pictures by one of those women who alone went through the world and collected flowers and painted them. And this was accepted as something not normal, out of the normal, but it was accepted and it was exceptional. So in a way, the women that England let grow really brought the country forward. Germany had a number of women, but it took some time before even the women in the sciences got the reputation that they deserved. In literature, for a long time, not at all. I mean, they were excluded from the general, as we say, canon, from the reading lists of students or teachers even.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just, these novels are more than just women's novels. This is what I'm trying to stress. They brought the world, economy, religion, psychology, social strata, and the plight of women.
Yeah, and as you allude to, the human element of the interactions, the intertwining, the romance. I've read a few classics, by no means enough to be an authority on this. But would you say that the women authors of the 19th century were better at illustrating romance than their male counterparts?
They were more ironical in portraying it. There were some males who could also write about romance and women. It was on a different level. Here you have women writing about women and men. They don't just write about romance from the position of women, but they also let the men speak in their romantic moments. So you get a fuller picture. The romance in people like Thackeray and even Tobias Smollett and Humphrey Clinker, they are just a sideline of the other topics that they touch on. The psyche of women is not necessarily what they're interested in. And here you have women who are interested in the psyche of men and women. Probably because they grew up in a world that was dominated by men, and they had access to more men than they had to women.
I mean, I would add Jack London to your list as well, because it's a very cursory sort of glance from what I've read with regards to the relationships, and very much male dominated, as you allude to. Yeah, I mean, but
there are exceptions. I mean,
yeah. I mean, but Dickens was very good, I thought, in at least consistent in presenting female thought, female characters.
Yes, but the female characters, they're not that sensitive to others. He is sensitive to their feelings, but the female characters are not depicted as being very sensitive to the male element, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely bow to your superior wisdom in this area. No, I have to. I mean, I've read Dickens. I've not read all of Dickens. That this unfortunately remains something that I will pursue with vigor. And also, obviously, this is a challenge which you have, very generously aided in by sending me the complete works of Dickens, for which I'm eternally grateful. And yeah, but it's something that I clearly need to address. I mean, I find that I'm drawn to more female writers, although of a contemporary nature. So I'm reading more female writers of the 21st century. I feel that there is a certain passion, a certain raw anger and angst in some of the character representations that you have. It's also interesting that there is a greater sort of mixture of genders and gender representation in 21st century literature, which you never experienced in the 20th century. So, there are many steps forward in the industry.
Plus, women writers are more direct, particularly those of the 21st century. They're direct in terms of they don't hide their intelligence, they don't hide their questions, they don't hide their anger, which they had to do for a whole number of centuries. Even in the 20th century, women writers in early 20th century, German women writers were sentimental in the sense of we can't really say and do what we want to do, so we are being empfindsam. We're going to be sentimental in the sense of sentimental journey. I could never really get into reading women writers of the 20th century, particularly not the beginning of the 20th century. That came later. But I don't read because something was written by a woman or something was written by a man. I'm an avid reader. When I was young, I read anything and everything. The reason I got into the 19th century English literature was when I was in England. I didn't have access to the most modern German writing, and it really didn't quite interest me because they were so much stressing the formalities of writing, the experimental writing. I had a feeling English writers could tell a better story. And over long periods of time, I still think that is very true. And I love storytelling. I dive into a book, and there are books I read over 3 days, and they may be 1,000 pages. If they're, as I say, if they're knitted well, if they really draw you in. You cannot read, for instance, Shirley day and night. You have to give it room in between. It is not that compelling. Read me, read me, read me. You have to think about it. You have to drop the book. It's not that much of easy reading. The North and South drew me in so that I couldn't stop, yes. But that's the type of books that interest me more. And that is very rare in German literature, I would say.
But I mean, I hope that we will touch on some examples of German literature that have drawn you in, because I think we've reached that point in our sort of podcast series where we will be moving, through different stories as we develop, because that's essentially what is your passion, but also something that I very much love. I love literature, and I'm very self-critical of the fact that I haven't read enough of it. So I also sort of breathe that literal breath through your words, and hopefully we'll find it as an inspiration to to push me to reading them as well. So next time, do you think you would perhaps add a German book or author for the next time that we talk, do you think?
Let me think about it.
Okay.
There are, of course, there are German writers I dearly love. There's an Austrian writer I dearly love. He's in his 50s, and every book he wrote, he writes like it's easy to write. And I'm one who has to really work at writing. It's to draw it out of myself. And his books read like he just sits down and writes and stories about people on the border of society, and he portrays them with a love and kindness that is it's really flooring me. He's an Austrian writer, and I will probably reread one of his books. Unfortunately I've bought his books so often, and I always give them away. I don't have one here, so I can't even reread anything. But there's one I dearly love, and it may take some weeks before we can talk about it. It's Ein Leben von Robert Seefeder, an Austrian writer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well then happily then we will consider Mr. Seefeder then in a few weeks' time. Yeah. Okay, but then
I must apologize, because I realized something that I wasn't used to doing or feeling. I feel I'm getting opinionated about literature. And it may be old age that I can say that is something that I had to read, and I know it's good, but I wouldn't reread it. But that is something I would reread, and these are different things. German literature from 850 through modern times in one big lump over a period of 3 years, reading for the PhD. Doesn't leave time to read what you would like to read. So in a way, you get tired of reading good literature because you have to. Mm. And I've gotten away from that. I'm really reading or rereading things I dearly love. And they may not be the non-plus, but I think I still have not lost my taste for literature.
Well, that's great to hear, because you talk about it in such a thrilling manner.
Well, it's an apology that I had to throw in there, because I realized all of a sudden that years ago I wouldn't have been so negative on German literature, because I was right in it. I had to read it. We had to read something like 2,000 pages a week to get through. And that becomes a strain, and it becomes, however good the books are, you lose nerve. And as I said, I'm reading right now books out of my library that I haven't touched for 10, 20, 30 years, and discover many things I really, really like. The English novels of the 18th century, of the 19th century, I've picked up frequently, even just to read 4 or 5 pages. And thanks to BBC, many of them have been put to film and have been filmed in a great way. So I always double the input of North and South book, North and South video, and so on and so forth. Jane Austen, Bronte's, Thackeray, what have you. I always have the book and then read it and then see the movie again. And that's a very, very nice way of looking at literature from 2 sides, because a filmed book, of course, is totally different. It loses in one way, but it gives you images and it gives you points that your mind remembers. So that combination, I think, is wonderful.
Mm-hmm. It would also be good to hear your thoughts about a story or writer or book that you disliked, and then we could go into, as opposed to talking, because it's, I suppose that there are so many books that you really like, that we could talk about. But maybe every now and then you could pick out a book that you really dislike, and you could tell me why. And yeah, maybe we could think about that too as a topic. But yeah,
Right.
Karin, yeah, I mean, you said earlier that you didn't want to talk for too long, and I've already kept you going for an hour.
You kept me going, and I kept you going.
No, but, I mean, for me, it's not a problem. But I mean, we want to ease you back in to the podcast sessions. So, yeah, it's great to have you back. It's almost as though we had never lost our contact. So easily
We
to
didn't.
use. Yeah. Yeah, no, we didn't lose the contact, but we didn't. The conversations we couldn't talk for the past couple of months. So you sort of slip straight back into your natural mode of being, great in your communication. So I'm extremely happy to be able to have these chats with you again.
I'm so glad we can talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, after this then, let's have a quick chat to see when you are next available. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much. And thank you for also introducing North and South to me. It wasn't actually on my radar, so thank you very much for that too.
Plus, try to get the tape from the BBC version.
Yes, less tape, but streaming nowadays, I think, is a possibility. But of course, I will try to grab a hold of it. Yes,
because it's fun. It may also be fun for your wife, and maybe even Beate may be interested in looking at it, because it's in English, German, and I think Italian or whatever.
Okay, well, I'll watch it in Italian, and I'll let the others watch it in German. We'll see how.
I don't know whether this is the one. I have one tape, one DVD that is in German, English, and Italian. I don't know exactly whether it's that one, but definitely it's English and German.
Okay, all right. I'll find it, and I'm sure that we will have a lot of fun watching it. Yeah, brilliant. What else can I say? Thank you very much, Karin. It's wonderful to speak with you again.
Thank you.
And mic.